ba 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 ba. So to start today's session, I wanted to see if there was any questions from the last couple sessions that we had. We started with the first two being about strumming. We had some strumming basics, then we started talking about some embellishments. And so did anyone have any questions with those? No questions? Cool, no worries. And so, yeah, if you ever do have questions with that, all of this is available on YouTube as well. You might be watching this as a recording, and feel free to leave them down in the comments below if they're on. And if not, try to just send a message and we'll be sure to cover it sometime. So what we're going to talk about today is finger picking. And before we start talking about it, we have to give a little bit of a preface that there's a lot of correct ways to finger pick on the ukulele. We're going to learn the very, very most basic way of finger picking on a ukulele, and then we're going to learn a little bit more of an advanced one that I think is good to move on to as early as you can from the first one. And then in next week, we're going to be breaking down some concepts even further. But basically what we're going to learn how to do today is stuff like this. Instead of just, playing one note at a time, finger picking allows you to play multiples in really quick sequence or multiples at the same time. But before we begin doing it, we really want to make sure that we understand where we should be finger picking and how, so that you can get the best sound possible with the least amount of effort. So we're going to start with two finger picking. Now, I'll tell you right now, I don't use this technique very often outside of when I'm teaching somebody their very first finger picking thing. So when you're starting, it's okay to do this, but we're going to work on another variant pretty early on. With two finger picking, we're going to be using our index finger and our thumb on our playing hand, the one that's strumming our ukulele. In this case, though, we're going to be working on finger picking it. To start, what I want you to do is take your thumb on your playing hand. I want you to place it on your C string, which is the second one from the top right here. And where I want your thumb to go is I want it to go right about where the sound hole and the fretboard here meet. You can see that little area. I'm going to put my thumb right about there. You'll notice I'm about a 45-degree angle. I'm not trying to be completely perpendicular, but I'm also not trying to be really parallel, right about that 45. It's okay if you're a little more or a little less, everyone's hands are going to be different shapes and sizes, but right about there. And then what we're going to do with this, so we're going to take our index finger and we're going to move it down to the E string, which is the one right below it. And we're going to try to make sure that that index finger is more perpendicular to the string. So do you see how it's more straight on my E string? The thumb more at that angle, the index here more straight down on the E. This is really important when we're doing this, to keep the thumb in front of the finger, right? A lot of times people will do something like this. And the problem with doing that is it makes it really hard to get a good tone. And you'll see why as we really go into the nitty-gritty of what makes good tone with it. But for now, try to keep that finger behind the thumb. Now, what naturally happens with this is the ukulele is kind of an awkward instrument. I'm a 6'3" person, and I've got big hands. I'm a big dude. This is a very small instrument. So my hands take up a lot of room. And what this means is when I'm finger picking, you'll notice that my wrist right here bends pretty hard. And that's just because it needs to kind of fit in there. Now, if you don't have as big of hands as me, you might not bend your wrist as steeply as I do, and that's okay. Just as long as that thumb is about 45 degrees, right where that fretboard meets that sound hole, and the index is behind it, more at a perpendicular angle, that's going to be what we're looking for. Now, to start with this, what we're going to do is we're going to take our thumb and we're going to pluck the C string. And as we pluck the C string, we're going to just be using the pad of the finger. And we're going to be, as we strike it, pulling a little down and just a little bit out. So it looks something like this. And as I do this, you can notice my thumb kind of rests on the inside of my index finger a little bit. It's not, going really hard in there, but just barely kind of touching that index finger to give it a sense of belonging, right? We can really feel that it should be there as you're going through on that index. So you see that it's almost like I'm holding a business card or something, a little bit of that motion. Now the thumb should be pretty easy to get a pretty good tone with. The one that's really hard is the index finger. And what we're going to do is we're going to pluck our E string with that index finger. And that looks like this and sounds like this. Now, there's a trick to this to make sure that you do it really well. The trick is don't hook and yank. So what I mean by that is don't take your finger, hook it in, and yank it out. You could break your string doing something like that. And it's a clunky, not very good sound, right? What you rather want to do when you're finger picking is allow that first knuckle right here to bend back a little bit. You see how as I apply the pressure on the E string, that first knuckle has a little bit of give to it. This can take a lot of practice at first, but as I do this, I'm going to then release on the string. I'm going to come a little bit up and a little bit out, and it looks something like this. And what you'll notice is that index finger is going in to the thumb the same sort of way my thumb was going into the index. You'll notice this is really pronouncing that the finger is behind as it goes, and you'll see that index finger kind of recesses a little bit as it goes through it. And that's really important, that little bend. It's a little bit of a Zen way of looking at it, but what I want you to think of is not that your finger's moving the string, but that the string is moving your finger. Now, obviously the finger does in fact move the string. That's how the sound is created. But if you have this mindset, it can really help get a good, clear tone and not be too bright and clunky. So that looks something like this. You see that that index finger on the E string is just sort of plucking and coming up behind the thumb a little bit. All right. So let's go ahead and try playing the C string with our thumb and then the E string with our index. And let's do the C again with our thumb and then the index. Let's just kind of go back and forth between these two strings and try to get as comfortable as we can. Some really common mistakes people make is they start doing something like this. See how the finger is getting in front? And when I do that, what the problem is now I have to kind of draw across the string before I pluck. And that's a lot of wasted motion. And it's not that you can't get a good tone doing this. You certainly can. There are players that do really well with this. It's just so much harder to get a good consistent tone doing that versus keeping it more perpendicular. And so making sure that those fingers are close to each other, not too close, but just offset like that, with the index more behind and the thumb more in front. Now, to take this to the next level, what we're going to do is we're going to play our C string, and then our E string, and then we're going to kick each finger out. So we're going to then play the G string with our thumb, and then we're going to play the A string with our index. So what this is, we call this an in to out pattern, because I'm going to start inside with my thumb on the C, index on the E, and then my thumb's going to go up to the G, and then my index out to the A. So it looks something like this, nice and slow. C, E, G, A. C, E, G, A. And if I repeat this, it looks and sounds something like this. And what's cool about this is as you speed it up, it sounds really nice. And the nice thing about this is by making sure that you're not touching any other string but the one that you're playing as you do this, you'll let all these notes keep ringing. And when we let the notes ring into each other like this, we call it campanella style playing, which is, I believe, Italian for bell-like. And this is a really popular technique on the ukulele, especially when you have a high G, because it allows you to get more sustain and resonance. And it's one of the things that really makes the ukulele a unique instrument that will do kind of a lot of cool things with. So it's kind of your first foray into it. So let's go and try it again. We're just going to take our thumb on the C, index on the E. We're going to pluck C, E, kick out, G, A. Let's try it again. C, E, G, A. Now, if you want to take this to the next level, you can go back down the way you came. So you could go C, E, G, A, what we just did, and then follow it with G, and then E, and repeat. C, E, G, A, G, E. And this is called an in to out pattern. Now, if you're playing a low G ukulele, it'll sound different than this, but it still works. It's still the same logic and concept of getting comfortable with those fingers on the strings. You'll just sort of have different sounds and priorities as you're playing, but the technique itself is exactly the same. There's no difference to how you strike the strings right now. And so this is our two-finger picking method. And I mentioned before that I never really use this. And the reason is because I feel short-staffed when I do it. When I do two-finger picking, I feel like I'm working much harder than I need to be. And to be honest, I picked up the ukulele for a very simple reason. I picked it up because it has 4 strings and I've got 4 fingers. That was my selection choice. I tried to do the guitar and the whole 6 strings thing. That didn't work out for me very much. So when you're working with this, you want to make sure that you get really comfortable with using all of your resources. If we're playing chords, we're going to use 4 fingers all the time, at least 3. When we're finger picking, we're going to introduce a 3rd finger. Eventually we'll get to 4, but for now we're going to do 3. And some of the best players in the world, this is their primary finger picking style. If you ever watch like Jake Shimabukuro play and finger pick something, he uses the 3-finger picking method more than anything else when it comes to picking. And how we do this is very simple. We take our thumb and we place it on the C string just like we did, the exact same starting point, right at that 45-degree angle, right where the fretboard meets the sound hole. Then we're going to take our index finger and we're going to play on the E string just behind the thumb. Same deal, right? Everything so far is exactly the same as what we did a moment ago. But to add another layer, we're going to take our middle finger here and we're going to place it on the A string. So when we place this on the A string like this, you'll see that I'm still trying to get a perpendicular angle with the fingers, and I'm still trying to make sure that my fingers are stacking each other a little bit going back. You see how the thumb is in front and then the middle is kind of at the back? If you're like this, that might be a little bit too much of separation. And if you're like this, that might not be enough. But try to keep it, relatively close, but still stacked in this sort of sequence. Now, as you do this, you might notice that your wrist will have to bend a little bit more because squeezing that middle finger in there can be very challenging. And with this comes an added bonus of a technique that's called an anchor. This is completely optional. So if you try doing this and you don't like it, don't worry about it. But if it helps you, go for it. What it is taking your pinky and stationing it on the outside of the ukulele right here to give you a point of reference. That anchor point is what can ground you onto the ukulele so that you always sort of know where you are. The danger with the anchor point is if your technique looks like this, see how that looks really good? And then I use my anchor and it makes my hand go down or something, that's a problem. We don't want the anchor to change our position. We want it to stabilize our position. So for me, when you see this is the technique and this is with the anchor, nothing is really changing. So if it helps you, you can place the anchor first and then build the technique and kind of get how that feels. And if it's awkward using that pinky, don't even worry about it. It's not a requirement. I usually don't use an anchor when I'm finger picking because with some of the styles I use, you're not really supposed to. But with the 3-finger, there are times where I know I'm going to sit in this technique and I'll throw that anchor down and I'll feel nice and cozy and comfortable with fingers really stationed well. It can also kind of help you hold the ukulele and balance it. If you're seated and your uke is kind of falling all around, that anchor can just kind of help prop it up a little bit. I wouldn't say that it holds it all by itself, but it certainly can help with that balancing act of holding the ukulele, which I truly believe is the hardest part of playing the instrument, which is crazy to say, but it's so true. So with the anchor or without, we have our thumb on the C, our index here on the E, and our middle now on the A string, and it should look something like this. What we're going to start with is we're going to start with something that's called a pluck strum. And all that we're going to do is we're going to take all 3 of these fingers and we're going to pluck all 3 of these strings at the same time. And we're just using our open chords right now, nothing fancy. And it should look and sound something like this. Now, as you do this, the goal is even tone over all 3 strings. And if you're getting even tone right now, right away, wow, it took me a long time to get it. So don't stress over if, the E string is really quiet or the A string is really loud or whatever it might be. Maybe the A string is really quiet. It's all different things for different people. But as I'm doing this, you can really see the finger movements. The thumb is going down. The index and the middle are coming up and out a little bit. And they're trying to not hook and pull, but rather trying to go up and kind of release out just a little bit. And that's what gives us that buttery tone. Again, I can't stress enough. We want the finger to not hook and pull this way, but we want that digit right there, that to bend as we're plucking. Some flexibility there is what gives a good tone with both of these fingers. And you can really see that as I pluck. I don't do this. This is bad. You hear it doesn't sound very good versus this is good. You see how it bends up a bit before it comes off. Takes some serious finger dexterity, but you'll get it with practice. So we're plucking all three right now just to try to get that even. Let's go ahead and switch it up a little bit. Let's just pluck the C string with our thumb. And then let's just pluck the E string with our index. And then let's just pluck the middle on our A. So we're just plucking C, E, A, C, E, A. Now let's try something else. Let's try going our C string by itself, and then our E and our A together, and doing that separate. This is my favorite pattern to do with the three finger. This is the first half of it. We're plucking just that C string, and then the E and the A together. Now let's try repeating that. So we'll go just the C and then E and A together. If your A string's really weak because your middle finger doesn't like doing that, it's okay to dig in a little bit deeper with that one. Generally speaking, your A string is going to be your most important string for a lot of finger picking because it will oftentimes have your melody on it if you're playing any sort of melodic sequence. So it's really a good idea to get that middle finger very comfortable at plucking the strings because it's going to be very important for later stuff. So I'm just plucking the C and then the E and the A. Now, as I mentioned, this is my favorite pattern, or the half of it. The other half is taking this thumb and moving it to the G string, just like we did with our two finger pattern when we went and moved it out. But this time, we're not going to be moving our other finger. Our index and our middle fingers are going to stay stationed where they are on the E and the A strings. And after the thumb hits the G, they're then going to pluck the E and the A together. So that's the other half, is you pluck the G with the thumb and the E and the A with the index and middle. Now here's what's cool, is if you alternate with the thumb and you play these two in between, it looks and sounds something like this. C, E and A, G, E and A. Now the reason this is my favorite pattern is if you're playing on a high G like I am, it's creating this nice little bass line of the low note and then a higher note. If I put this with a chord, maybe like a C chord for a moment, just the 3rd fret here on the A string, it sounds something like this. Here it kind of is bouncing. It sounds like this old-timey, guitar line or something. If you're playing on a low G ukulele, you just flip-flop. Instead of starting with the C string, you start with the G string because that's your lower string. And it'll be the same type of effect. It works differently over different chords, but you'll notice that will allow you to play your bass note and then your slightly higher note. So it's kind of fun to play around with. On a low G ukulele, my favorite thing to do it on is a G chord, which is just the index finger here on the 2nd fret of the C string, ring finger here on the 3rd fret of the E, and middle here on the 2nd fret of the A. If you're on a low G, you play the G first and then the C. And it's the same type of sound. In fact, I have a low G kind of here. I tuned it up. It's this little soprano. I like to have my low strings on sopranos because I'm weird or something. But it sounds like, sorry, it's a little out of tune. Wasn't expecting to grab it. You can hear the difference of that sound starting with the low note. It's just kind of fun to play around with. But it's a really simple finger picking pattern. Just one of these two strings, then these two together, then the other string, then these two together, and you can play whole songs with it. In fact, we're going to work on a chord progression that's really, really, really easy. It's one of my favorites. If you watched some of my earlier videos here with the UKC, you probably have seen me do this before, but we're going to start with a C chord. And the way we play this, there's a couple different ways. But for now, to make it as easy as possible, let's use our index finger. Let's place it here on the 3rd fret of the A string. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to pluck my C and then my E and A and then my G and then my E and A. And after I've done that, I'm going to move to my next chord. And my next chord is called C major 7. Name doesn't matter. I mean, it does matter, but not for today. All that you do is you take this index finger and you move it down 1 fret to fret 2 on the A string. And you're going to do the same thing. Pluck your C, your E and A, then your G, and then your E and A. And then you move to your next chord. Now it's called a C7, but can you guess what it does? If you guess to just slide down again, you would be correct. And that's called a C7, but you can hear that sort of sound. So now we're going from the C, down, down. Just this really nice little sound. And then to kind of resolve it, to make it sound really nice to end, take that index finger and just move it up 1 fret to fret 1 on the E string of the, fret 1 of the E string, excuse me. And then do the same thing. Play the C and then the E and the A, G and then the E and the A. And just using this very basic pattern, again, the C and then the E and the A, and the G and then the E and the A, and just kind of move it down until there, you get this really nice sequence. And Mary said a really cool comment in the chat saying this is the chord sequence for something, correct? Yeah, so. Exactly right. It's a really common, cool chord progression. And so if you were playing melody with somebody or somebody else was playing melody, you could just pick something like this along with it. Just down 1 at a time. Create that sound. The reason I love this so much is because it's 1 finger. I mean, you could use, 3. It's more efficient to do that, certainly, but you could just use 1 finger and play a whole progression. How cool is that, right? And with this hand, we're using 3 fingers, but it's only 4 fingers total. That's, we're at half of what we got there. So that's great. So with that picking, that's, some basics with the 3-finger picking. From here, you start to articulate them individually even more. And so what we just did there was play a couple at a time, like the E and the A, or all 3 at a time. You can play any combination. And it gets really, really confusing when you try to do offset ones. What I mean by that is, what if you play just your C and your A strings together? That's just the thumb and the middle finger played at the same time. That might sound and look something like this. Feels kind of awkward and interesting to do that. It's a good thing to practice. Maybe you alternate that with just the index on the E string. You might notice that this feels a lot like doing this. It's not intuitive because your fingers aren't used to working independently like that. But that's what makes this such a good exercise. And then from there, you can try all sorts of things, including back to what we started with. We started with that in to out pattern, right? We can do the exact same thing with 3 fingers now. And if this seems a little advanced, it's okay. You can keep practicing what we've been working on. But let's go and station those fingers in their starting points. The thumb's going to start on the C string, index here on the E string, and middle finger here on the A string. And I'm going to pluck my C string with my thumb, then my E string with my index, then my thumb on the G, and then my middle on the A. So it goes thumb C, index E, thumb G, middle A. Now again, this is like, rubbing your tummy and tapping your head at the same time. But you can even do the in to out that we kind of started with and create those different types of sounds. Again, if you're playing with a low G, it'll sound totally different, but it's not totally wrong. It's just different. And that's what's so exciting about this technique. And the thing to start practicing is just getting really comfortable individually moving these fingers as well as moving them together, being able to pluck combinations of strings. One last idea here is we plucked our C, E, and A together. Let's try plucking our G, E, and A together. So skipping the C string, that's kind of tricky. So thumbs now on the G, index on the E, middle on the A as it's been stationed, and just pluck those 3. I can alternate between these. That's a doozy, but man, does it sound cool. really full sound with, I'd say minimal effort, but we're making some effort here, right? It's a little tricky, but it's a really fun one to kind of work on, right? And so that's three finger picking in a very, very small nutshell of what you can start working on and making up your own patterns and doing different things to experiment with it. And what we're going to be working on more from here is we're going to be working on some set finger picking patterns and stuff. So in our next session, we're going to work on these techniques that are called the 3-finger roll and the 3-finger tremolo. And they build off of these techniques. But before you tackle those, it's a really good idea to have some comfort with this technique, whether it's just kind of plucking, the 3 strings at a time, practicing playing them individually, and things like the in and out. As long as your thumb is going between the G and the C strings, your index is on the E and your middle is on the A, you can't really do it wrong. And that's what's exciting about it. So you could even look up tabs and different things if you see combinations of strings and try this technique just to see how it works for you. So I'm going to open it up for any questions you guys might have. There's no such thing as a bad or silly question. I have a 5-year-old, so I'm ready for any type of question. So feel free to ask away. Does anyone have any questions with these techniques or anything else? Yeah, Mary.
Okay, sorry. Yeah, I guess it's just going to be time practice. I notice my thumb definitely is heavier trying to pick that, and my index finger too is lighter than the middle because I don't know, middle, but
Yeah.
mine just seems a lighter touch. So
yes, very normal to have happen. Yeah, the middle finger tends to be stronger than the index with this. It's a bigger finger. Like for me, the middle finger is so much longer. In a lot of ways, that's going to be a big boon later when we start playing more melody sequences on the A string and things like that, because we want that extra oomph. However, right now it can be frustrating. And so, yeah, it is that sort of timing practice of getting comfortable. The thumb feeling heavier means we got to back off it a little bit. The middle being a little bit more prominent than the index means we also back off and try to increase with the index too. That's an important thing to consider, is if you have a volume differential with anything you're practicing, it's not just about bringing the volume down on something or the volume up on something. It's about both. It's about getting comfortable with increasing the volume with the thing that you want to increase and decreasing the volume with a bit with the things that you don't. So it is a juggling act, and it will get more comfortable as you practice it. Another question I get asked a lot is the finger position. People, sometimes will be picking up here or way down here. And notice at the beginning, I talked a lot about it being right in this area, the thumb being right where the sound hole and the fretboard meet, so that your fingers are kind of all over the sound hole. And the reason for that's very simple. It gives you the most consistently good tone. It is not wrong to finger pick up here or finger pick down here. However, it sounds very different. If I do that pattern here, sounds like that. If I do up here, see, it's kind of quiet, but also kind of clicky almost, right? That'll be a combination of the fingers kind of hitting the fretboard, as well as it's just this kind of thinner sound. But if I move down here, there's a little more, a little bit more of that banjo sound. And so there are times where you might want that. Maybe I want that in a song. But generally speaking, you don't usually want that, right? You usually want a much more soft ukulele sound rather than a little bit harder banjo tone like down here. And so just keep that in mind and play with it and see where that magic spot is for you, because everyone's ukulele is different. Everyone's fingers are different. So a lot of people play in different places and get similar sounds. I think that the sound hole is just the best from both my own playing as well as through teaching. It's been the most consistent for people. So any other questions at all? Oh, there's a question. George has, do you prefer a high or low action? Is it easier to fingerpick with a higher action and easier to strum with a lower action? That's a great question. So if you don't know what an action is, if you look at your ukulele and you look right through here where the strings and the fretboard are, there's a gap, obviously, because if there weren't, no sound would be made. But the distance between your string to the 12th fret is your action. And so when you look at mine, you can see, I honestly can't tell you the exact measurement. That's a couple millimeters. And with that, some players prefer a high action, which means the strings are further off the fretboard. Other players like a lower action where the strings are closer to the fretboard. There are positives and negatives to both. Generally speaking, a low action is considered a good thing, especially for beginner players, because it makes it so that when they're fretting chords, it's much easier to compress the strings, right? It also means that if you're doing something like strumming, there's less of that distance. So when you're strumming, doing the techniques we talked about in our first 2 classes this quarter, it's a little bit easier to not get stuck up on the strings because they're lower to the fretboard. However, those positives to a low action don't necessarily outweigh the negatives or the positives to high action, which is a low action is more likely to buzz because the string can hit the fretboard more easily. And a low action also can't get as much tone and sound out of the instrument for the same reason. When you strike the string harder, it vibrates bigger. And with that bigger vibration with a lower action, eventually it'll hit the fretboard more easily. So with finger picking, a lot of times people think a higher action can be better because it gives them more distance for their fingers and can allow them to kind of pop it a little bit more. At least that's why I kind of got from the question there. And so when it comes to answering your question of my preference, I personally always prefer a high action. And the reason is because even though it does make a couple chords a little bit more difficult, the flexibility it gives me for my ability to play the instrument completely outweighs that. So if you're a brand new player, a low action can be really nice. But as you get better with the instrument, you might want to try getting a little bit higher of an action because it gives you a little bit more opportunity. I like a higher action both for finger picking, and I actually especially like a higher action more for strumming. And the reason is because when I'm playing something really hard, whatever that might be, I can really dig into the uke and not lose its tone. And if the action were really low, those notes just wouldn't pop the same way. And so that being said, one of my favorite ukulele players in the world, James Hill, the last time I saw him, which granted was a long time ago, his action on his ukulele was like the lowest I'd ever seen in my life. And he gets more sound out of that instrument than I could ever hope to dream with. So it's not that high action is better, period. It's just for different types of preferences. And so, if your ukulele is hard to play, a lower action can certainly help. They can help make strumming a little bit more approachable, and a higher action if you want more oomph out of your instrument. Good way to go. The analogy I like to make with that is like snow skis or something like that. When you're learning how to snow ski, you get these big fat skis that give you a lot of stability. But the problem is they don't give you a lot of control, right? So as you get better, you get skinnier skis, which are much harder to control, but you're getting more comfortable with it. And that control is good. You want that control. Even though you might be more likely to fall, you're also less likely to fall with control. It's the same deal with the higher action. When this is no longer a problem of playing some of these bar chords and things, the higher action can sometimes give you more control as you're going through. So are there any other questions? These have been great questions, by the way. Really awesome ones. Oh, I missed a comment here from Mary saying, I taught that little sequence to my oldest granddaughter and she loves it. Awesome. It's so cool. Just, one finger. It's so, I love this instrument because of the simplicity to pick it up and play, right? I don't think there's any other instrument in the world that has the approachability of the ukulele. Is it, difficult to master? Yeah, but it's really, really not difficult to pick up and play your first song. So, So any other questions at all with anybody? No questions. Okay, so next week we're going to be working on the 3-finger tremolo as well as the 3-finger roll. And these are going to use these 3-finger techniques. So be sure to get comfortable with plucking the C string with your thumb, as well as the G string with your thumb, and then your E string with your index and your A string with your middle. And if you just sit there and you just play each string individually, that's great practice. Just anything to get those fingers moving, because it can feel like this at first. But thank you guys so much for coming. I'll look forward to seeing you guys in 2 weeks for our next session. And I hope you have a wonderful weekend. I'll talk to you soon. La 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 la.